17% of American retirees hit $1 million, yet most of them still feel broke. Meanwhile, a woman with far less money quietly stopped worrying about her bills forever. Her name is Tanya, and her account never once touched seven figures. Most people believe financial freedom begins the exact second you reach $1 million. That belief is wrong, and it quietly keeps millions of people chasing the wrong number. Here's what nobody tells you about the real number where freedom actually begins. Freedom is not a trophy at 1 million. It is a math threshold you cross earlier. The dangerous part is that the wrong target makes people work years longer than needed. Tanya reached her real number at $412,000. From that day forward, her investments quietly paid her essential bills every single month. She kept working, but the fear that runs most people's lives simply switched off. $1 million was never the finish line. It was just a round, marketable number. Run the numbers, and the real threshold sits far below what everyone assumes. Today, we break down the exact figure where financial freedom actually starts. Here's the trap that catches almost everyone chasing that clean $1 million target. The number feels official, so people treat it like a law of the universe. But 1 million means nothing without knowing what your own life actually costs each year. $1 million funds a very different life in Ohio than it does in Manhattan. Most people never calculate their real expenses, so they aim at a stranger's number. They grind for a decade toward a figure that has nothing to do with them. Rachel did exactly that, and it nearly cost her the best years of her 30s. She believed freedom lived at 1 million, so she sacrificed everything to get there. She skipped holidays, skipped rest, and told herself the million would finally fix it. What she didn't know is that her actual freedom number was less than half of that. The gap between the myth and the math cost her roughly 7 wasted years. Because here is the uncomfortable truth most finance channels quietly skip over. Your freedom number is not $1 million. It is a multiple of your spending. Change your spending and the entire target moves, sometimes by hundreds of thousands. So the real question was never how do I reach $1 million? The real question is, how little do I actually need to never worry again? That single reframe changes everything about how early you can reach freedom. The industry loves the million because a round number is easy to sell. It fits neatly on a book cover, a headline, and a retirement brochure. But your bank statement does not care what looks clean on a book cover. It only cares about one thing: does your money out-earn your monthly bills? Here's what the data shows about the number that truly matters. Let's keep this fair and start with two women who looked identical on paper. Rachel and Tanya were both 34, both earning $62,000 a year. They lived in the same city, drove similar cars, and started investing the same month. Same salary, same age, same start. Only one difference decided their freedom. Rachel anchored her entire plan to a single glowing target: $1 million. She wrote it on a sticky note and taped it to her bathroom mirror. Every raise, every bonus, every spare dollar was fed into that one enormous goal. Her monthly expenses were $3,100, but she never once did the math. So her brain kept insisting the finish line was 1 million, and only 1 million. Tanya took a slower, quieter, and frankly smarter approach to the exact same salary. First, she tracked every expense for 90 days without judging a single purchase. She discovered her essential bills came to just $2,700 a month. That's rent, food, insurance, transport, and utilities, the true cost of keeping her life running. Then Tanya multiplied that annual essential number by 25, the classic freedom multiple. Her essential spending was $32,400 every year. Times 25, her real freedom floor came to $810,000. But here is where Tanya got clever and separated survival from lifestyle. She realized full freedom and first freedom are two completely different milestones. Her survival number, the bare minimum to stay afloat, was far smaller than that. Stripped to essentials, Tanya could survive on $20,000 a year if forced. 20,000 times 25 is only $500,000, not $1 million. And the day her portfolio's returns covered that survival number, her fear disappeared. That day arrived at $412,000, years ahead of Rachel. Meanwhile, Rachel, chasing $1 million, still felt just as anxious at $600,000. Same money, wildly different peace because one of them knew her actual number. Rachel measured herself against a myth. Tanya measured herself against her own life. Look closer at Rachel's mirror note and you see the real cost of a wrong target. She turned down a lower stress job because it slowed her march to 1 million. She skipped her sister's destination wedding to protect that year's savings rate. Every choice bent toward a number that never actually reflected her real life. Tanya, by contrast, took that lower stress job the moment her floor felt close. She traded $12,000 of salary for her weekends and her sanity. Because her number was smaller, that trade barely delayed her freedom at all. This is the quiet cruelty of the million-dollar myth we rarely talk about. It does not just cost you money, it quietly costs you years of your life. And that single difference is the entire subject of today's breakdown. So let's run the real math and find where your own freedom actually begins. First micro lesson: the freedom number is not a mystery. It is a simple formula. Financial researchers call it the 4% rule, or the rule of 300. It says you can safely withdraw 4% of your portfolio every single year. Withdraw 4%, adjust for inflation, and the money should last 30 years or more. Flip that around, and it means you need 25 times your annual expenses. 25 times your yearly spending is the entire secret behind your freedom number. So the math never starts with $1 million. It starts with what your life costs. Spend $40,000 a year, and your freedom number is exactly $1 million. But spend $30,000 a year, and that number drops to $750,000. Spend $24,000 a year, and suddenly freedom arrives at just $600,000. Every dollar you cut from spending removes $25 from your target. That is the most powerful lever in personal finance, and almost nobody uses it. Cut $500 a month in expenses, and your freedom number falls by $150,000. This is why two people with the same salary can have wildly different freedom numbers. The rule of 300 says monthly expenses times 300 equals your number. $2,700 a month times 300 is $810,000. Second micro lesson: there are two freedom numbers, and confusing them costs people years. The first is your survival number, the bare minimum to keep the lights on. The second is your lifestyle number, the amount that funds the life you actually want. Most people only ever picture the lifestyle number, so freedom feels impossibly far away. But real freedom, the fear-switching off kind, begins the moment survival is covered. Once your investments can pay rent, food, and insurance, you are no longer trapped. You can quit a toxic job, take a risk, or breathe without financial panic. That survival threshold is what Maya Wealth calls your personal freedom floor. And your freedom floor almost always sits far below the famous $1 million mark. For someone spending $2,000 a month on essentials, the floor is $600,000. For a frugal saver at $1,500 a month, the floor is just $450,000. Hit that floor, and every extra dollar you earn becomes truly optional. That optionality, not the million, is what freedom has always actually meant. Most people chase the ceiling when the floor is the part that sets them free. Third micro lesson: there is a hidden inflection point long before any freedom number. Charlie Munger built billions and said the first 100,000 is the hardest part. Below 100,000, your wealth depends almost entirely on how much you save. Your contributions do the heavy lifting, and the market barely moves the needle. But once you cross $100,000, something quietly begins to shift. At $100,000, a modest 7% return adds $7,000 a year. That's $7,000 appearing while you sleep, do nothing, and skip the coupons. Munger's exact words were blunt: get to 100,000, then ease off the gas. Because after that point, compounding starts pulling harder than your paycheck ever could. 100,000 is not freedom, but it is where the snowball finally starts rolling. Priya understood this at 28, and it completely changed how she invested. She fought brutally hard to save her first 100,000 by her 29th birthday. After that, she watched her returns start doing work her salary alone never could. Her second 100,000 took barely 4 years instead of the grinding first 8. That acceleration is the reason the early money matters so much more than the late money. Picture the snowball at the top of a long hill, barely moving at first. Those first painful pushes are your savings, grinding it forward inch by inch. But past 100,000, gravity takes over and the ball rolls itself. Compounding becomes the gravity, and your job shifts from pushing to simply steering. Priya described it as the moment savings stopped feeling like sprinting uphill. Suddenly, her money was working a second job she never had to clock into. Fourth micro lesson: there is a number where you can stop saving completely. Researchers call it coast fire, and it is wildly underrated by almost everyone. Coasting means you have saved enough that compounding alone reaches full freedom later. You still work to pay today's bills, but you never have to invest another dollar. Here's the shocking part. The coast number is often a fraction of the full number. A 30-year-old with a 1 million target needs only about 130,000 to coast. 130,000, left alone for 35 years, quietly grows into that million. Priya hit her coast number at 32 with just 210,000 invested. From that moment, she could have stopped investing entirely and still retired comfortably. She didn't stop, but knowing she could gave her a freedom most people never feel. That is the quiet power of time. It does the saving your salary cannot. The younger you reach your coast number, the smaller and easier that number becomes. Wait 10 years to start, and that same coast number can nearly double on you. Which is why the real enemy of freedom is not low income, it is delay. Fifth micro lesson, freedom is not one line, it arrives in 3 distinct tiers. Tier 1 is breathing room, roughly 100,000, where the snowball starts rolling. At breathing room, you feel calmer, though your bills still depend on your job. Tier 2 is the coast point, where compounding alone guarantees your future freedom. At the coast point, you gain permission to slow down, switch careers, or rest. Tier 3 is the freedom floor, where returns fully cover your survival expenses. At the freedom floor, working becomes a choice rather than a monthly obligation. Notice that none of these 3 tiers required you to reach a full $1 million. For most people, all 3 tiers arrive somewhere between 200,000 and 800,000. The $1 million milestone is real, but it usually lands after freedom already began. People celebrate the million and never realize they were free 100,000 earlier. Knowing your 3 tiers turns a vague dream into 3 concrete, reachable checkpoints. Sixth micro lesson, your expenses, not your income, secretly control your entire timeline. 2 people earning the same salary can retire 15 years apart based on spending. Rachel spent $3,100 a month, pushing her freedom floor above $900,000. Tanya spent $2,700 a month, pulling her floor down to $810,000. That $400 monthly gap moved their targets by $120,000. And because Tanya needed less, she also needed fewer years to get there. Every expense you commit to is really a lifetime subscription paid 25 times over. A $90 monthly bill quietly adds $27,000 to your freedom number. Most people never see that hidden multiplier, so they underestimate every small subscription. Cutting waste is not about deprivation, it is about buying your freedom back cheaply. The frugal saver reaches freedom first, not because of income, but because of the multiplier. Run the numbers on your own essential spending before you ever trust a round million. Let's run one final worked example, so the number stops feeling abstract. Meet a saver spending exactly $2,500 a month on everything essential. That's $30,000 a year to keep her entire life comfortably running. Her full freedom floor is 30,000 times 25, or 750,000. Her survival number, stripped to the bone, is closer to 22,000 a year. 22,000 times 25 gives a survival floor of 550,000. And her coast number at age 30 is only about $140,000. So her real freedom story has 3 checkpoints, and none of them is $1 million. 140,000 to coast, 550 to survive, 750 to live fully. The word million never once appears in her actual path to financial freedom. This is the math the sticky note crowd never runs, and it costs them years. Professor Wealth would say the number was hiding in your bank statement all along. Seventh micro lesson, your freedom number lives in today's dollars, and inflation moves it. The 4% rule already assumes you raise withdrawals with inflation each year. That's why it uses 4% instead of the market's full 7% return. The gap between 7 and 4 is roughly the long-run pace of inflation itself. So your portfolio quietly funds 2 jobs, your spending and your rising future prices. This is also why a bare 3% withdrawal is the ultra-safe version. At 3%, you need 33 times expenses instead of 25. $30,000 a year at a 3% rule means $1 million. So the cautious freedom floor and the aggressive one can differ by a lot. Pick your withdrawal rate honestly, and your real number reveals itself between them. For most people, a 4% floor and a 3% ceiling frame the answer. Neither of those brackets forces you to worship a single magic million. Eighth micro lesson, Beware the trap that keeps even smart savers working forever. Researchers call it one more year syndrome, and it quietly steals your best years. You hit your real number, then whisper, just one more year to feel safe. That whisper repeats every single year, and the finish line keeps sliding away. The cure is a defined buffer, not an endless, undefined chase for more. Add 1 or 2 years of expenses as cash, then trust your actual number. A $50,000 cash cushion beats another decade of anxious oversaving. Rachel had one more year syndrome for 7 straight years without ever noticing it. Tanya defined her buffer once, hit it, and then genuinely let herself relax. The number only frees you if you actually let yourself stop at it. Ninth micro lesson: where you live can cut your freedom number almost in half. Your biggest expense is usually housing, and housing is wildly different by city. The same life that costs $4,000 a month in one city costs $2,000 elsewhere. Cut housing by $2,000 a month and your floor drops $600,000. That is not a rounding error. That is potentially a decade of your working life. This is why some people reach freedom by moving, not by earning more. Geography is a lever most million chasers never even realize they are allowed to pull. You do not have to move, but you should know the number if you did. 10th micro lesson: high-interest debt quietly raises your freedom number from the inside. A credit card at 20% is the exact opposite of a compounding asset. Every dollar of that debt drains faster than your investments can possibly grow. So clearing toxic debt is the highest return move on your entire freedom path. Paying off a 20% card is a guaranteed 20% return, tax-free. No investment reliably beats that, which is why debt comes before the freedom math. Kill the high-interest debt first, then your expenses, then let compounding take over. Do it in that order, and your real number shrinks faster than you expect. 11th micro lesson: the hardest part of the freedom number is defining enough. Our brains are wired to move the goalposts the instant we get close. Every raise gets absorbed, every upgrade becomes normal, and the target quietly drifts up. Economists call this lifestyle creep, and it is freedom's most patient enemy. A person earning $50,000 dreams of 80. At 80, they crave 120. The number keeps running because the definition of enough keeps running with it. The people who reach freedom early are simply the ones who pinned enough down first. They decided what a good life costs, then refused to let the number drift. Tanya's enough was $32,000 a year, and she guarded it like a boundary. That boundary, not a bigger paycheck, is what actually bought her the freedom. Let's run one more example, this time for someone who earns much more. Meet a saver pulling in $140,000 a year. You might assume her freedom number must be enormous, well past $1 million. But she deliberately keeps her essential spending at just $36,000 a year. 36,000 times 25 is 900,000, still under 7 figures. Her survival floor, stripped down, is only about 26,000 a year. That survival floor lands near 650,000, far below what she could hit. Because she saves the huge gap between income and spending, she arrives blazingly fast. Her high income is not the freedom, the gap she saves is the freedom. A big salary paired with a big lifestyle can still trap you for decades. A modest salary paired with modest spending can free you shockingly young. The number always bends to expenses, no matter how large the paycheck grows. So let's put all 4 levers side by side before we reveal the twist. Lever 1 is your spending, the single biggest multiplier of your entire number. Lever 2 is time, which quietly does the saving your paycheck never could. Lever 3 is your withdrawal rate, sliding your target between conservative and bold. Lever 4 is debt, which secretly inflates the number until you finally clear it. Pull those 4 levers, and your freedom number moves hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not one of those 4 levers is the phrase $1 million. Now here is the counterintuitive twist that reframes this entire conversation. Financial freedom is not a net worth at all. It is a single day on a calendar. It is the day your investments earn more than your survival costs, quietly and automatically. You could cross that day at $400,000 or at $900,000. The exact figure depends entirely on your life, never on a stranger's round number. Here is the line worth remembering. Freedom is not a number, it is a ratio. It is the ratio between what your money earns and what your life costs. Tip that ratio past 1 and you are free, whether you have $1 million or not. This is why some millionaires still feel trapped and some savers already feel free. The millionaire with a lavish lifestyle can have a ratio well under 1. The frugal saver with modest bills can have a ratio comfortably above 1. So the trapped one is technically richer, yet the free one sleeps far better. Net worth is the scoreboard everyone watches. The ratio is the game that matters. Chase the ratio, not the million, and freedom arrives years sooner than expected. Most people spend their whole lives fattening the numerator and ignoring the denominator. But shrinking what your life costs is often faster than growing what your money earns. That's the quiet lever the wealthy understand and the anxious million chasers miss. Tanya understood the ratio at 34. Rachel finally learned it at 41. 7 lost years, 1 simple reframe, and a target that was wrong the entire time. Think of the ratio as a seesaw between your returns and your expenses. Every dollar you invest lifts one side. Every bill you cut drops the other. Most people only ever push the investing side and ignore the expense side entirely. But the expense side is the one you control today, this week, right now. You cannot force the market to double, but you can redefine what you need. That is why the ratio is such a quietly hopeful way to see freedom. So stop asking when you will finally reach $1 million. Start asking what number makes your returns quietly cover your real life. Think about what that reframe does to the anxiety you carry every payday. You stop comparing yourself to a stranger's headline and start measuring your own math. The million was never a finish line. It was a fog machine hiding your real target. Clear the fog, and most people find their freedom sitting quietly within reach. Priya found hers at 32, Tanya at 34, both far under $1 million. Their secret was never a bigger salary. It was simply running the honest numbers. That number, not the million, is where your financial freedom actually starts. So let's turn this into something you can actually use this week. Tonight, pull up your statements and add up only your essential monthly expenses. Multiply that number by 300 and you have your real freedom floor. Then multiply your bare survival expenses by 300 for your earliest freedom point. Those two figures matter far more than any round million you have ever been sold. Write them down, and suddenly freedom stops being a fog and becomes a finish line. Most people never run this math, which is exactly why most people feel behind. You now know something the sticky note crowd spends whole decades never learning. Make the decision that matches your reality, not someone else's marketing pitch. If this reframed the number in your head, you belong on this channel. Subscribe to Maya Wealth and hit the notification bell to stay a step ahead. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every day. No hustle culture, no shame, just the numbers that quietly set you free. And if you want the calculator we used today, tell us in the comments below. Share the freedom floor you got. Someone else's number might just unlock theirs. Remember Tanya, free at 412,000 while Rachel chased a phantom. Remember Priya, coasting at 32 with room to breathe for the first time. None of them waited for $1 million, and none of them regret it now. Your freedom number is smaller than they told you, and closer than you think.